I first heard Taylor Swift on the radio in 2006 when she was first on the radio. And it was just absolutely incredible to me because it was like nothing else on country radio at that historical moment. And it was interesting to me because she cared so much about morality. There was a really innocent cleverness where it was like she had a real touch for it. My best friend and I would get the album, and the album was so clever and it was tightly structured in such a way. It was so interesting. And there were so many moves where it was like clearly intentional, but also nonchalant. I was like, wow, there's so much to it. And so I was a Swiftie before from the very start. And the thing that I noticed is that she was like really interested in right and wrong. And so everyone always said that like Taylor Swift is interested in writing about her boyfriends or whatever. And that was like medium true. But the thing Taylor is really interested in is she's interested in thinking about what's okay and not okay. And if you think just about the opening lines of the Miss Americana documentary, the thing that she says is not anything about relationships at the outset, but the thing that she says has really guided her sort of North Star since she was a little kid is wanting to be good. And also she says wanting to be seen as good. And I think that is a sort of much closer starting point to the Taylor Swift catalog than to any sort of particular relationship or post-mortem of a relationship.
Hi, everybody. You're listening to The Soloists. My name is Diana Brown, and I'm here with my friend Mallory Everton, and our guest today is Ryan Davis. Hi, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
Hello, Ryan.
Ryan was a political science professor at BYU. Just to be clear, Ryan, you have a double PhD, right? One of those rare breeds out there.
I claim to be a philosopher, but I'm in the political science department. Yeah.
Yes. And why did you get the second PhD?
I really want people to think that I'm a philosopher. It's important to me to be able to tell people on planes or whatever that I'm a philosopher.
Yeah.
That's fair.
It's
It's all about impressing people on planes. I feel that way too.
Well, we've been friends on Facebook for a long time, and twice a year or so is Ryan likes to post highlights from his student reviews. They're always amazing. This one I think is great, and it introduces the topic that we wanted to get into today. If you ever wanted to walk into a political science class that's actually a philosophy class, listen to Taylor Swift, hold a pheasant hunt, get first-class drawings, and still be confused on whatever Kant was talking about, this is the class for you.
That's a great advertisement for really most of what happens in it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll admit I want to take it so badly, Ryan. I mean, I looked up all that I could about it online, and I was just like, this was made for me. I would love it.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to visit and talk to some students about philosophy and Taylor Swift, we would love to have you.
Do not tempt me with a good time, Ryan. We'll talk about it after this, okay?
Well, we're excited to get into your philosophy of Taylor Swift, and in particular, talk about how Taylor Swift can help us understand the state of modern romance today. But before, we understand that you have some questions for us.
I did. I wanted to ask you a couple of things, and so I was just interested in what your project is and what your aims are in it. If you don't mind sharing just a little.
Yeah, sure. Well, here are the two pillars, I think, of what The Soloists is about. First is it's okay to be single. I think a lot of people grow up in our church feeling like the worst nightmare is to end up as a single, lonely person.
Yes.
And that's like just so damaging. I mean, first of all, just numerically speaking, I even confirmed this with a sociologist this week. Apparently, it's around 55% of the American adult population in the church is married, which just means like we're pretty close to half and half. So that's pretty sad if we're doing that to each other. It's also just like biblically, singleness is something that is given even a higher status than marriage in some Christian traditions, is something that allows a special way to consecrate your life. And I think with our conception of marriage, we've lost sight of the rich opportunities for spiritual growth that singleness can bring. And even within our own tradition, there's plenty of ways to think about that. For example, thinking about the three Nephites. You have Jesus in the Book of Mormon talking to his 12 apostles, and then he's like, well, and what do you guys want to ask of me? give me your one genie wish or something like that.
Yeah.
And the 9 are like, we want to just go straight to heaven and be with you. And he's like, cool, you can do that. And then these other 3 are like, we actually want to do something different. And he's like, also cool, good for you, go do
Mm.
that. And I think there's something about that that kind of relate to marital status that way, that it feels so often like we assume that there's one good way to do your life and one good way to do
Mhm.
human relationships. And I feel like that's a great example of like, look, there's multiple like thumbs up you can get for ways that you feel inspired to consecrate your life and spend your time. And we just have such dreadful like imagery of singleness in our church, I think. And so
Yeah.
I think we're wanting to change that and help people think through culturally, theologically, and just like how day to day in your life we can thrive as single people. But the other piece is we want to really get into some of the unique pieces about dating and forming relationships today. Uh, Talk about some of the tricky challenges that come up and help people navigate that a little bit better and just
Mm.
be companions to people along the journey. So that's how I would summarize what we're doing. Would you add to that, Valerie?
So well said, Diana. I think also there's just this element of, because of the sort of ugly portrait of singleness that can come up in our specific culture, I do think we have a lot to offer the world, to the 45% of single people, and also the 55 who are currently partnered but might not remain partnered for whatever reason. I think we have something to offer here, because in our culture this is a pain point, and so us dealing with it is something that can be offered as a gift, and hopefully prevent the story from continuing in that specific way. I don't think it needs to be as scary or as hard to be single. Like, the first thing I think of is a friend who has done hypnobirthing for all 3 of her babies, and she did home births. And I didn't know this before talking with her, but one of the big tenets of what she was learning taking those classes was that when you're told all the time that birth is going to be the most excruciating, painful thing that you ever do, it makes you afraid and anxious and scared, and it makes sometimes the
Hmm.
natural process
Mhm.
quite worse than it needs to be. At least that's the argument, that like with deep breathing and reminding yourself that your body's made to do this, like that's more of the focus when you approach it from a hypnobirthing direction. And
Mm.
I think singleness is a little bit like that, where it's like, if you're told it's the worst possible existence and then it happens to you, then you're like, I'm in excruciating pain all the time.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what I was told it was going to be like. When it's like, well, but actually your body was made for this. Like, we were given gifts
Mhm.
and tools, not just like biologically, but also culturally, or from our families and from our churches, to be able to deal with how hard it is to be a person. And it's hard
Hmm.
regardless of whether or not you're single or married. So, let's hypnobirth this singleness.
I love that, Mallory.
A
That
new
is such a good
conversation.
metaphor. Yeah.
That's great.
And
I like both of this. Wait, can I ask you like one more question in totally general terms? What I'm
Mm.
wondering is, do you have principles in mind where, as happens in our tradition, where you imagine that you're the person who's called upon to give advice to some huge congregation of young-ish single people, but people at the age in life in our tradition where they're imagining embarking on finding a partner or something like that. Do you have things in mind where you're like, oh, here's the principles that you would say to people in that setting, principles that you're either in favor of or against in communicating to people in that setting?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is that, as far as advice that I think is really damaging and either needs to be unpacked or tweaked or retold, I think anything that couches finding a partner in being worthy of God's love needs to be like, someday this will make sense. And when you meet him, it'll all be worth it when you meet that guy. Or I bet he's just around the corner. There's nothing wrong with you. Somebody will love you someday. It's like, like, if it's always like that person needs to show up, or else
Mhm.
life is not beautiful. We got some work to do in that area, I think.
Mhm. I like
yeah,
that one.
I don't know where to begin. One thing,
Hmm.
just though, related to Mallory's comment, and this is why I think taking up like supporting, you're a whole person as a single person, you are whole. You don't not need any appendages in order to be okay. But one of the reasons why I think it's important to talk about the dating context in order to even make that point is, I mean, we live in an age where dating is a marketplace. And in order to fulfill this celestial duty or whatever we want to call it of marriage, you need to play the game and dress the part, act the part, and do all sorts of frankly unholy things sometimes in order to
Mm.
to figure out how to succeed on in a dating market. And I think the age of dating apps has made this like even worse. And there's a lot of like injustices to it and things that I think like frankly like when paired with this like theology of eternal marriage, I think are kind of ugly. I just think it's weird that we never address that elephant in the room. Like some of the best people I know are frankly just
Mhm.
too shy and conscientious to even want to date much. And I think that the reason they're not married or not going anywhere is because they're like sensitive souls who are like, this is
Mhm.
feels like a really crass way to treat other people, and they just don't want to do it. And there's part of me that's like, I respect that. Like, I think
Yeah.
it's the
Totally.
equivalent of people who feel icky about sales jobs. Why I think it's kind of important to just think about the context in which we're taught to think that partnership should happen, because I think there's a lot of pain there. We have such a culturally narrow conception of like who's attractive and
Mhm.
who's dateable, and that can get so easily mapped onto your sense of like, are you on God's plan, are you walking towards temple marriage? And it makes me really sad how easily those things can be intertwined.
No, I like that. I like both of those as principles to start with.
Do you think those count as principle? Never mind, we don't need to get into that.
We're chiseling away. Yeah.
To me, they counted as principles because you both said something that had a normative edge to it. I took the first one to be something like, if the reassurance is dependent on the emergence of some other person, that there's something amiss about that reassurance. And then I took the second one to be that there's a kind of tension in two ideals, the ideals of we have a certain ideal of marriage, and that we have a certain ideal of the means to marriage. And there's just this peculiar lack of fit between our ideal of the means to the thing and the ideal of the thing. And there's something unfortunate about that. I don't know if that's forgive me for.
No, that's great. Yeah.
No, I think you synthesized it beautifully.
Yeah.
For me, Diana, I just feel like this strange, it's just like a complete dissonance of a popularity contest with
Yeah.
being completely seen and loved. In order to create a godly partnership, it feels like this is the wrong way to do it. And maybe that honestly is one of the things that we're unpacking, which
Yeah.
is like if you show up without competing and you show up refusing to play a game, what happens? And maybe, like you said with your friends, then marriage doesn't end up happening. So what does that mean? I don't even know how to answer that question.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess like just another thing that I would add is like thinking through these things and trying to be more grounded in like what's actually occurring and what are these actual ideals that are motivating us. I think the more honest we are, the more we open ourselves up to connection and relationships with people, even if it's in like a more universal way of just feeling this sort of humble appreciation for belonging to the human story. I mean, I feel like I've caught myself all the time through my 20s. Like, I don't know, whenever I've prayed, like, when will marriage happen for me or whatever, that's often felt like spiritually dissonant to me. Like, that can feel like such an individualistic way to frame this, when aren't our like baptismal covenants and all of this supposed to be teaching us to look at a much broader kind of community and in terms of who we belong to and who we're wanting to serve and like what kind of relationships we're supposed to focus on? Like, why are we always trying to figure out how to conjure this highly particular thing that's not here? It feels like, I don't know, there's something amiss there.
So I think these are good because they're like statements of these troubles or challenges. Do you think that if you were back in that situation where you're talking to the group of young people who have had the cultural upbringing that people in the tradition have had, would you say anything to them about whether you would recommend that they should want to be married, or would you be totally agnostic about whether one should want to be married? Would you say anything about the adopting or withholding from adopting that as a life end?
It's such a good question because I think that both options need to be presented. And I do think there's something in cultivating people who are cultivating lifestyles that are geared toward community and partnership and partnered growth, and how that could look many different ways, and being open to the different types of partnered growth and different opportunities that you may have to partner with people in your life to build things and bring things into the world, and to dream together and to create together. I still feel like that marriage is so important and valuable. It's just so clearly becoming less and less of a guarantee for people as the rates of singleness and as the difficulties in dating increase.
Well,
Should
Ryan,
we?
is there any guidance you would give us, or where would you focus on some of these questions?
I teach people at this stage, and a thing that I wish I could get at more with something like, just what are your most honest desires, that if you could just say what your most honest desires are in a way where, if we could do it, is there any way where we could get into a social situation where you don't feel like you would have to represent your desires in terms of what you think other people want your desires to be? If you felt truly free to, and not even free to do whatever you wanted, and like, I'm not going crazy here, I'm just saying, if you were just free to represent, like, here's the things I most honestly want, what would those look like, and how much do you feel constrained in various settings from expressing those things? That's a thing that I'm always interested in, what my students' generation's experience is.
I'm curious about your journey to teaching a philosophy course using the work of Taylor Swift. She's an incredibly hot topic in general, but I'm so curious about how this class has come to fruition and what the course basically is.
Thank you for asking this question. When I was coaching debate in graduate school, I was coaching a summer debate camp because that's how cool I was. And it's so hard to get people to stay motivated because they're at debate camp all day and it's just debate camp. There's no soccer or something like that. It's just debate camp. So I was giving this evening lecture because those children are still with you in the evening. They're bored. They don't want to be there. So I was like, we're just going to do the ethics of blame. And we listened to Should Have Said No. And the director of the debate camp texted me and he's like, my whole Facebook feed is just like comments on Should Have Said No, the Taylor Swift song as she performed it at the CMAs. And I was like, this is such gold because it makes them care about the ethical issues. And so from that time, a long time ago, I've sort of had this thought, which is, if you can put an ethical question to people in a way that's not you're reading the paper, but it's just actually how it comes up in a way that you care about it, and especially in a way if it splits the room. Where like people listen to Taylor Swift and some of them will be like, no, she's wrong about this. And other people will be like, she's absolutely not wrong. And that's like the start of something interesting. So that's how I got into it.
Where did you recognize this desire for her to be good? Like that, were there particular lines or songs? I will confess my Taylor Swift literacy is quite low.
That's okay.
So
that's okay.
I only know the hits.
So there's a lot of intertextuality in Taylor Swift. And one of the things that she'll do is she'll
intertextuality meaning
there's a lot of Taylor Swift
of,
songs that are referring to other Taylor Swift or others or other artist songs.
Yes.
But there's a lot of Taylor Swift that's about Taylor Swift. And so in the last song of the Lover album, and the last song always is one of the songs that has pride of place in a Taylor album, because it tells you what the thesis of the album is. And so the last song of the Lover album is Daylight. And Daylight is a song about 3 different views of love. And the first view, she says, I used to think love was black and white, but then she thinks that was a mistake. And the black and white view of love was just that love is about calling the balls and strikes of who's right and wrong. And when do you blame people? When do you have to accept blame? And she even says in one of the vault tracks of her early albums, the Speak Now vault tracks, where she says it's like a code. Love is about following the codes, following the rules.
Yeah.
And then she says, I used to think that love was red, whereas about the expression of strong emotions. And then she says that view was also wrong. So the view of the song is that love is actually, it's not about black and white and it's not about red, but it's about seeing people in the daylight. It's about the view of love is seeing people for who they really are. And so you just see in that single song a kind of evolution of the view, where the view, and none of those views are about relationships proper, but they're all views about the ethics of love, as it were. So I think I'm just reading it. My point is I'm just reading the text. I'm not saying that I have to invent it. I'm saying that the text is already about these kind of like the questions about the morality of the thing. You sound a little dubious.
No, I'm actually kind of persuaded. Like she's obviously telling some sort of story about a relationship here, but yeah, she's also interested in what is love and this evolution from something about people being either good or bad to just whoever you feel more strongly about to seeing
Yeah.
people in the daylight. That's quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, pretty good, huh? Pretty good.
It's a fascinating gumbo, but I think I'm starting to understand it in my small brain way. I, but the idea that she's a portal to, I mean, this is the way I'm looking at it, especially given the context of this discussion on this podcast. She's like my exact age. 1989. I was born in 1989.
Oh, wow.
And so to
What month were you
me, she
born?
September. So I'm like 2 months older.
You're
You're three
still
months
so
older.
close, so close. Yeah.
But yeah, like same year in high school, like
Yeah.
graduating class or whatever. And so to me, and that's obviously probably more specifically me, she represents like my entire dating adulthood and all the different things that a woman can sing about and all the different heartbreaks and relevant topics in dating and being alive right now. But specifically love, because she does, I mean, like you said, she does write a lot of songs that people at least assume are about her boyfriends. And so using her as a sort of portal to not just talk about poetry, but to talk about philosophy is pretty, and ethics, especially, and sort of like the modern state of things, makes a lot of sense.
Here's a question. Would you two say that Taylor Swift has been unlucky in love?
Mm.
Has she been successful? She's not married. And how do you think that factors into this evolving philosophy or whatever? Why has it not
Mhm.
resulted in marriage?
This is a good prompt. The thing that comes to mind in the catalog is Taylor Swift's song The Prophecy, where the prophecy is about her and it's about her extraordinary success. Taylor Swift is perhaps the most famous person in the world now. And interestingly, she became the most famous person in the world after she predicted that she didn't want to stay on the stage too long. And then it was after that that it was just like, bigger and bigger and bigger. And so it just seems like there's something poignant about the prophecy because she says, please change the prophecy. I don't want the money, just want someone who wants my company. And so I do think that, and I don't even mean that, and I don't even think that she even means this in a relationship way, but I do think that there can be something lonely about that particular narrative, the same way that there can be something lonely about any kind of narrative. Now, does that mean that she's unlucky? I mean, there's also a song about this, and then I'll stop, which is there's a song in the Red album called The Lucky One, which is about Joni Mitchell. It's one of these things where it's in the classic country tradition where it's sort of double-edged, where the lucky one is the starlet who becomes the big star, but the lucky one is also the person who leaves. And the double meaning of the lucky one is that it's lucky on both sides. So none of this is an answer.
Well, I
Mm.
don't know that you can really answer it, because what is luck? Luck and love. Because there are many people who are married who are unhappy, or there are many people who have like short-lived, beautiful relationships that they would never, that end for, all kinds of tragic reasons potentially, but that they would never change, and they would probably call themselves lucky.
Mm.
And in some ways, she's been extremely lucky. There's this beautiful Walt Whitman quote where he talks about how the pay is certain, because even if you're in an unrequited relationship, you could still write a song about it, basically. And that is look at what she's done. This is why I feel like she's so worth discussion. She represents so many things, because the question of whether or not she has been almost a tragic figure in some ways, a person who wanted a different prophecy to come true in her life, you have to bring in all kinds of topics, like the gender dynamics of power and success and how difficult that might be in dating and what that might present, and her notoriety and public opinion and popularity and how that plays into everything. Her success or unsuccess could be argued forever, because like I could argue that her massive success is so mortifying. Like, it would be mortifying to be the most famous person in the world. I She's got almost unprecedented fame at this point. And what happens next? Let's just, you know, send a
Well,
prayer to Taylor Swift.
I think what's so interesting about this, on one hand, we could say maybe it's like her unprecedented power and success that made relationships and romance difficult. But on the other hand, it also is like such a relatable story. Like looking at our
Mhm.
generation, Taylor Swift's trajectory is not at all abnormal. You know what I mean? For however famous she is just like a pretty typical story of somebody born in 1989, a successful woman of any tier. I guess I'm kind of curious about that. And I guess it's kind of interesting and ironic. The first time I ever became conscious of Taylor Swift was in the car for a young women's activity. And we were driving from Ogden, where I was raised, to Salt Lake City for some event. And there was a beehive who was singing Love Story. And then she was like, "You don't know Taylor Swift? You got to listen to it." And Love Story is such a stereotypical prince and princess. Like, it feels like a Disney story of romance and love, where it ends in marriage and saying yes. And that's the trajectory. And that's the assumed plot of love. And that's why I was getting at when we think about like unlucky in love, that's a person just like thinking of stereotypical plots that doesn't get married or whatever. And we just assume it's going to go that way. And it just hasn't gone that way for her.
You're right. It makes her even more relatable in a lot of ways. And it just gives her more things to sing about. I actually really have found that to be kind of a treat. When I was 22, I had a song to dance to about it. You know what I mean? And so have all the 22-year-olds since. So yeah, she's a fascinating figure.
But I guess that's why it's like interesting to think about what's going on with dating and romance and love today. And like, it feels like it's not just Taylor's life. Like, there is something that's just like, that plot is no longer the plot that most people's lives are taking along these trajectories. So I'm curious what her music has to say about that. If you guys have thoughts on that.
The Victoria Post Department expresses, among a lot of other feelings, but it expresses a sort of regret about being in the relationship that didn't succeed, getting older, and giving all that youth for free. You know, she says, there's no amount of power or status or influence or fame to insulate you from that thought. The youth goes away one way or the other, and giving away that youth for free is part of that experience that I feel like is you're describing, maybe.
I can relate to it, but that particular line is like dripping with the idea that youth is valuable in a way that I really pray it's not. You want your future to be ahead of you, but there is this feeling, I think, especially for a woman in her 30s who's re-entering the dating market, bouncing off what can feel like rock bottom. I guess I'm still here. That belief is like, it's a real demon that I'm trying to undo in my own brain. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, I think that Taylor Swift, not that I can speak on her behalf, but I think she would agree with you.
Ryan, if you had to pick 3 or 4 Taylor Swift lyrics that describe what you think describe the state of like modern romance or modern love today, what would they be?
One of my now professional things that I really think about is like how to have good Taylor Swift prompts. And I think this is a really good, so I appreciate your asking it to me. Because it did make me think about the lyrics I would choose in a slightly different way than I otherwise would. So I have my top 4, all right?
Okay.
Love it. We cannot.
Let's hear them.
So number 4 is You Can Hear It in the Silence, from one of the bonus tracks of 1989 from the song You Are in Love. And You Can Hear It in the Silence is about, so should I just give you the context of all these songs? Is that a thing that's...
Yes,
that would be great. That would be great. We'd love that for our listeners too.
Yeah, good for the listeners. So it's this song about, it has the kind of relationship plot arc that's a kind of characteristic Swiftian plot arc, let's say, where it's like things go well, you meet the right person, there's a good connection, and then there's just the moments in the relationship where there's nothing happening. So each time the chorus comes around, it's one of these genre tropes where the same chorus happens, but the meaning of it inflects slightly differently. And so the first time she says, you can hear it in the silence, you can see it in the darkness, you can see it with the lights out. And the idea is that there's a kind of inarticulacy to knowing that the other person loves you and knowing that you love them. There's something where you can have the experience but not be able to express it. And in each early version of the refrain, there's an echo that comes in. So there's the track, you can hear it in the silence, you can see it with the lights out, and then it replays over that. You can hear it, you can see it in the darkness, you can hear it, and so on. And then in the final one, she says, you can hear it in the silence, you can see it with the lights out, and then it's just silence. And I love that because it's like the invitation to the listener, where it's like, you can do it. And so it's a bit of encouragement in the song. And I just really like that. I really like the idea that The good case is a case where there's something that's a little bit inarticulable about the good state.
Tell me why that was one that you wanted to pick is like particularly indicative of how things are today. Do you think that love used to be more articulatable or something like that? Or do you think that's just how love is and that's just a particularly poignant line that captures some sort of timeless essence about it?
I was given those options, I kind of am tempted by the last one. But if I wanted to couch it in contemporary terms, a thing that I have done as a kind of observer is I've sort of looked at, because I'm just sort of interested in what's happening, the dating websites. And predominantly the thing I see expressed on dating websites is frustration, where there's like, I'm saying all these things, and it's like none of this communication is very effective.
Right now, I think we're in a spot when it comes to what you're discussing with dating apps where I don't think we totally know what to value. I think it's so easy to look around to others or to your community or even to this sort of version of yourself that you feel you're not measuring up to figure out if you're in love or not. It's like, it actually might be more simple than that. Like it might be more embodied than more like coming from a place of deep knowing than that and quieter than that. It might be subtler than that, like looking around for proof. There's something about romantic love that feels similar to trying to spot or pin down God, honestly. You can hear it in the silence. You can see it with the lights out.
Yeah. I really like that. I really like that as a bit of reading.
Yeah.
It's great.
Thank you. Thank
There
you.
is something too, now that we're getting a little more into the lyric, I think we live in like a very like overly verbose age. We present ourselves online so much, which is like either through like pictures or text. And there's so much talk and talk and talk. Even like the idea of a dating app, you have to speak for yourself in a way that like you didn't used to need to or whatever. I don't know. There's something she's getting at, something behind all of that fluff that you should just feel and know.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, do you have another one for us?
I do. Yeah, no, I've got that was my number 4. So I made these in a countdown format.
Oh, okay.
Man, that was 4. That one was good. Okay.
My third line is from the song Evermore. Evermore is my favorite Taylor Swift album, so this may be a Evermore heavy list. But the line is, "This pain would be forevermore." And Evermore is the title track of the album, and it's the last song of the main album. And it's one of these things where it's sort of like you get something from the lyrics, but you also get something from the way the music fits the lyrics. And so it's about a kind of melancholy feeling. So it starts out and you're looking out into the gray November, and you just feel a kind of listlessness, and you're looking into December, and it's still that dreary feeling. And then there's a sort of moment in the song where she's going through the process, where she says, "I had a feeling so peculiar, and I couldn't be sure if this pain would be forevermore." And so as she's like posing the question, "I couldn't be sure if this pain would be forevermore," it's a duet with Bon Iver. In the Bon Iver part, so her song is very melancholy, and there's only a few notes per measure, which makes it feel like the tempo is very slow. In the Bon Iver part, then there's like a lot more notes per measure, which makes it feel like it's really fast. Music goes up as if there's like a storm coming. So it's like the pain, and then there's the storm, and then the Bon Iver part is even about a storm coming. So it's like Taylor Swift can be accused of being on the nose, but I love it because she tells you exactly what she's up to. So there's the storm that comes in, the Bon Iver part is the dramatic thing that happens, and then the notes get much quieter and slower as the Bon Iver part. And then the Taylor Swift reprise comes in, and it turns out that the meaning of the song is that it seemed like she had the feeling was that the pain would be forevermore, and the storm comes in, but then the storm goes out. And then it turns out, of course, there's a double meaning in it as well. And the pain is not forevermore, except in the sense that the pain gives the meaning to the expression in the song. And in that sense, it's forevermore. It's for the album. It's for the memory of it.
Okay. So there's some big Taylor Swift philosophy too, and maybe the answer to like how she views her own experiences, including like romantic pain, which we assume that she's felt, which is that if it provides beauty or meaning, then it's somehow redeemed. Do you think she
Yeah.
would agree with that?
Absolutely. I think the sort of the redemption of the past is like one of the most important themes in the entire catalog.
How,
It makes so
yeah,
much sense too, with songwriting being essentially a form of therapy and journaling. And
yeah,
I think it's literally how we're instructed to deal with our regret and our pain.
yeah.
And getting to experience that, especially, yeah, with somebody who's on the nose and like just tells us exactly what's going on with her is, I think, an extra offering, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think the redemption of the past, I'm spitballing here because I don't know her discography or very well her catalog, as you keep calling it, but like, because I keep thinking about just her trying to make sense of a romantic life you hope is going to settle down into a marriage someday. I'm just assuming because of Love Story that that's what she had her eye on or whatever, and she's made several statements about wishing that Joe what's his name proposed to her, etc. And then it doesn't go that way. It kind of renders it there's this question about all of these experiences and like almost marriages that you had of like what was the point of those? Was youth wasted and stuff like that? So is that why she's interested in this question of redemption of the past? And that feels like a very salient question for people who also expect life to follow that plot, but for whom it doesn't, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. So
Okay, hit us with number 3
number
or
three,
2. This is number 2
yeah.
on the list
So
of
this
ascending
is
order.
from one of my other favorites, and the line is, maybe I don't quite know what to say, but I'm here in your doorway, and I just wanted you to know this is me trying. So the song is This Is Me Trying, and the line is, maybe I don't quite know what to say, but I'm here in your doorway. The reason this came to mind is that the most profound thing that I have ever seen on a dating app was, I forget what caption it was, but the person said, you can pretend to care, but you can't pretend to show up.
Mm,
I thought that was such
Mm.
like a great line. You can pretend to care, but you can't pretend to show up. And I think that there's all of these times when you don't know what the words are that'll sort of like be the right words to express. But even if you don't have that, there's still something you can do, which is the showing up. So I
Mm.
just love this line of like, maybe I don't quite know what to say, but I'm here in your doorway. I feel like there's this very relatable image. It's like you get to the person's house, you get there and you don't have the words, but it's like you're still doing it. You're still there. And it might come to you or it might not, but there's something that's communicated regardless, which is that you are putting the effort in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is
So
very
I love that
profound.
one.
It's so true. Yeah. Um,
You're being very indulgent of my Taylor lines.
oh
no,
no.
I'm persuaded.
This Is Me Trying, I think, is one of her best lines of all time. It's so applicable to a discussion about modern love and dating because it's just like, I remember when they first started coming out, I had a friend who was just like, "Oh, I couldn't possibly do that. Like, it's just so mortifying that like people could see you on there, like people could see you on there." And like that, dating is kind of mortifying in that way. Like showing up is implying I'm trying. I cannot both play it extremely cool and be here
Right,
like I don't care
right.
about finding
Yeah,
love. I'm
absolutely.
here. I care about finding love, you know?
Right. Yeah. And there's something I think I love about Taylor Swift is that she does things that are so intentional. Where Taylor always like has exactly the thing you're describing, where it's like she worries that she's not cool, or sort of like if people like her, maybe it's ironic or something. And it's kind of like because she always is like, Jack Antonoff says that that Taylor Swift is the hardest working person in the industry, where it's all effort all the time. And I love seeing someone like that, where they're not abashed about it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like a lot of commentary on Taylor Swift points this out about her that despite being the most famous person in the world, she's still kind of uncool. There's
Hmm.
something like kind of hard to place about it where she's like, and she's very, very beautiful, but not necessarily like this like hot, sexy seductress that like there's something, yeah, just perpetually normal about her and very
Yeah.
relatable in that way, which I think is precisely what endears her to people. Even
Mhm.
though I'm not a huge listener, I do admire Taylor Swift, just for the record.
No,
So
that is
I'm like totally on board with this whole thing. I think
I've now created this response in people where whenever I'm talking to someone, they have to be like, just so you know, I'm fine with Taylor Swift.
I respect her. Yes.
well, sometimes it is very charged territory, right?
No, that's true. The Swifties, you
It
have to be
can be.
careful. You can't, you got to be careful with the Swifties. Yeah.
Yeah.
If they're serious.
Yeah. All right, should we
Time for
do
number one.
the number one, our last one?
Yeah, and this one goes, Diana, the thing that you mentioned earlier, which is that the most famous song of all Taylor Swift is All Too Well, of course. And the most famous line in All Too Well is casually cruel in the name of being honest. So you called me up again just to break me like a promise, so casually cruel in the name of being honest. And that's the line where when you hear people sing it, man, people are all in on that line, where they're just they really go for it. Any audience of Swifties will really go for that line. And so I feel like it's getting at some deep feature of the experience of that group. So now I propose, if you'll indulge me, I'll give you my, I can stop there if you feel like, if you're already sufficiently persuaded of that it's like onto something.
No, please. Yeah.
Right.
Tell us more.
So I have a friend in the discipline who's a classicist. So she wrote an essay in this book that we're doing. And so she usually works in Greek poetics, but she wrote this essay on All Too Well. And her point is that All Too Well is just like Greek poetics and that the concept of tragedy is the same. Her name's Emily Holm, and her view is that what makes something a tragedy is not that something bad happens. That's not what makes something a tragedy. What makes something a tragedy is that it upends our expectations about what's going to happen. And so in All Too Well, they break up. And that's not the tragedy, because every song, Taylor Swift song, or bunches of them involves breakups, So the tragedy in All Too Well is not the breakup, but it's the fact that she discovers that contrary to the way our expectations have been set, where it's like they're going upstate to New York, they're at his mom's house, they're looking at pictures of the T-ball game, everything sets up your expectation that the other party is emotionally invested in the relationship. And the call that's casually cruel in the name of being honest, what the call betrays is that he's not emotionally invested in the relationship. And so it's not the breakup, but it's the discovery that the other person never cared the way that you cared. That's the tragedy.
Yeah. I mean, every relationship, I suppose, is like mutual delusion to some degree. That's like a very strong way to put it, but that you're telling some kind of story together that you want to be true
Right.
and that you're trying to constantly bring together. And a failed relationship is when like you don't manage to do that well, which means there was some discrepancy between like the story you were telling yourself about this person and what was actually going on. Oh.
Yeah.
And then you have this like relationship with like, huh?
The steps to different dances, Taylor says, is that, and that kind of.
Yeah.
Oh, the steps to different dances? This is beyond me.
No, but sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted you. I'm just saying that's the kind of thing where it's sort of like you're both telling a story, but it's not fitting together.
That's what I was going to bring up, is that I do think there is a decent amount of cruelty happening right now. And maybe you could argue that that's just a part of being human and being together. But I feel like the idea that I just don't think we take very good care of each other when we're dating. And I think that's one of the things that makes it more painful. And something about, just to reveal a little information about myself, but something about me sort of like, honestly, like giving up on marriage in a lot of ways has made me feel that I don't need to be protective or cruel in the same way that, and not that I feel like I was being super harsh or anything like that, but as my grip has changed on what was supposed to be an ideal situation or being the lucky one or the successful one in love and romance, I feel like I've been freed up to be kinder and to be able to date in a way that just felt like it was about human beings and it was about patience. And I mean, speaking of whether or not you're in a tragedy or a comedy, it's like, well, you don't need to know. You're in this moment and you're with this person and you're having an experience and you're lucky to be here. And
Yeah.
I feel like there's so much cruelty when we hold too tightly the idea that this person's supposed to represent us somehow, that they're replacing our self-esteem somehow. And so in some ways, I feel like I'm so much more qualified to be dating because I've done so much more like therapy and self-reflection than I had in my 20s. But there are so many beautiful relationships where people develop and figure out those qualities together. I've just been feeling lucky to be figuring some of these things out on my own so I could experience a different type of dating that didn't involve
Yeah.
the same amount of harshness, I guess. Like
Mhm.
so much judgment, of who's good and who's bad and who is worthy. And I think those might be the wrong questions. I don't know that that's really that's really serving us to carry around the idea that it has to do with people being good enough or in the wrong league, or I don't know. You get what I mean? No, this is the way we talk about people when we're talking about
Yeah.
dating.
Yeah. As you had that experience, do you feel as though that your changing your approach has enabled people to reciprocate greater kindness to you?
Yes. Yes. I can feel it immediately, actually. I've been crying a lot lately out of just like gratitude that I feel freed
Mm.
up to just appreciate the people in front of me because I finally don't feel like there's this like huge like unworthiness on my back all the time, like asking like, why isn't this working? Why not this one? Am I doing something wrong that I still don't, I'm not interested in anyone here or in this chapter of my life or this fate. And it's just like, I don't think that was ever a question I needed to carry around all the time. And I think that people can feel my interest and curiosity in them without that protective, like, but don't get the wrong idea because this from the scriptures that we love Jesus because he loved us first. I love to be the first person to love someone, especially if
Yeah.
it's like, well, I'm just allowed to love you for who you are right now. And we don't have to talk about romance today. You know what I
Mm.
mean?
That's really beautiful, Mallory. And I would agree with you. And about just how dating just doesn't feel kind. And
Hmm.
I'll include myself in that. I have ghosted people. I have been callous with people's feelings. Like, I think one of the things that's like hard in like a digitally mediated dating space is like people just don't have the gravity that they have when you meet them in person. You have context and you know their friends and
Totally.
there's
The
this world
stakes.
attached to
The,
them. Yeah, just like
hmm
I've noticed myself being, not always like a loving dater. Um, and I guess here's a question that I have for you both. She's naming that like honesty is being propped up as some kind of virtue in dating. And it feels like she's calling it into question. Like, is honesty really what you're supposed to be doing here? And
mm,
maybe like love and kindness or whatever this is at odds with honesty. Do you think she's drawing a distinction here between honesty and love?
Mm.
Or like, why else would honesty be connected with cruelty there?
I like that. I think that that is what's happening.
I think so. I have so many thoughts about this, but this is what I'm thinking a little bit because Diana, I feel like what you're getting at is so interesting. It's like, yeah, what if you do have sort of like the first things that come up when you're on a date with someone are some pretty harsh judgments, or like you're 6 months into the relationship and you feel like actually, this person's too fill in the blank, harsh, critical thing, for me. I was listening to the Gottmans the other day, like John and Julia Gottman. They research marriages and connection. And one of the things that they said is like, there's no such thing as constructive criticism. It's not a thing. Like everyone will respond to criticism in a relationship with it's not the ideal way to move things forward into greater intimacy with each other. What's better is to talk about feelings and where you'd like to go together. And if our honesty is actually just judgment that is based on limited information and our own sort of,
Mm.
foggy lenses, then honesty might not really even be a part of at least our honesty with our perspectives. I
Yeah,
don't
or the
know.
thing that I think about all the time is just like I think so much of the blocks we put up are really just kind of being like, yeah, you're not the one that I want to like really invest in or whatever. And you probably are honestly feeling like a lack of motivation to do that for
Mhm.
various reasons. So I think we're all like getting trained in like this language about our boundaries and our
Mhm.
limitations and just express to people where you are. But that's what I think of when I think about casually cruel in the name of being honest, just being like, listen, I'm just not emotionally available right now. And it's like, well, what if we were to try to be emotionally available instead of just saying that the point is to tell people that you're not? That's what
Mm.
it's making me think about is is honestly the point. I am curious how Taylor Swift would respond if somebody says, I'm just not emotionally available right now. What does that mean in the Taylor Swift world?
Oh, emotional withdrawal is the single thing that I feel like offends Taylor Swift the most.
Yeah, because she's all about being with life, even if it sucks, right? That's the
That's
point.
right. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
totally. The real retort in this one is Mr. Perfectly Fine, where she's broken up about things and she's like upset, it's like changed her plans. And Mr. Perfectly Fine is just sort of like he's just going about his life. And like that's like the real villain, is to be the Mr. Perfectly Fine of the situation.
Right.
Mm.
To be unaffected
Yeah.
by life and the people around you. I've met him.
I'm sure he's doing, I'm sure he's doing great.
I'm sure he's fine. That's
Yeah.
part of the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fine.
What would Taylor say to this? There's no spark, or I love you, but I'm not in love with you.
Oh, man, there's no spark, or well, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. I mean, there is a Taylor Swift song, Sparks Fly, about the contrast case to that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a song in the anthology of Tortured Poets Department called How Did It End, about the end of her relationship, presumably with Joe Alwyn. And the point of the song is that she doesn't know how it ends. Like she sort of knows each fact about what happened, but she doesn't know how it ends. The reason that comes to mind is that like a thing that can happen to you is that where you can know all the causal facts and yet there's just something missing that makes the thing a story. And so I feel like the thing that Taylor might say to that is something like, uh, sometimes you don't know how it ends. And that's just, there's no amount of additional detail that can give that to you.
Well
So
done,
that's just
Taylor.
so I'm learning, I keep expecting Taylor to have some like retort or a response or whatever, but it sounds like you're like, yeah, she sings about that. And that's just what happens here.
There's two, yeah, you want to, what was the genre you wanted of responses?
I thought she was, I mean, I'm not a Swiftie. I thought she was going to
Yeah.
have these like great one-liners where she's like, yeah, well, you suck. I don't know who I thought Taylor Swift was. Or some kind of like, I don't know. But okay, yeah. So she's yeah. No, this is good though. I'm
A
learning.
thing, yeah. Taylor Swift says most recently in the manuscript, which is the last song of the most recent album, she says that once I've written it, then it's not for me anymore. Then it's just like the manuscript is just like a text for anyone to look at. And so she says several times that she distances herself from having something that looks like the answer. But instead, what she has is just the manuscript. She just has the thing for you to
The
consider.
record.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. All you have is what happened. And she reverences the sacredness of these stories, even if they don't like wrap up anywhere.
I was just going to say, if we were looking for retorts to breakup lines, the first thing that came to my mind, Diana, when I read these, was she wrote a song that was on the Tortured Poets Department called The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived. And in Taylor Swift's music, I'm like, but there's this real dude who knows he's the smallest man who ever lived in the song The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived, written by the most famous woman in the world right
that's
now.
like precisely why I assumed that she had great breakup retorts, is because she's kind of famous for writing these like mean
Yeah.
songs about people she dated a decade ago or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah.
It could be I'm too soft for this.
You know what, Ryan, I think that's a great takeaway. And it speaks to probably just like the true like nourishment you offer in your course, because it does seem like you've found a lot of wisdom that I'm now going to be searching for when she pops up in my shuffle. So thank you.
That's great. That was a very generous rejoinder.
Yeah.
You look
I
very
have a
pensive, Diana.
question. I do
Yeah.
have a question that's bubbling up for me about Taylor Swift. I remember my mom whipping out this quote. I don't know who said it. Maybe it was Aristotle. I don't know. Something like, if you marry well, then you get a good marriage. And if you don't, then you become a philosopher.
Mm.
And the idea being like, if the marriage is going well, then you get a good marriage, and if it's not, then you're going to have all of this pain to ruminate on to inform your life philosophy. And it sounds like Taylor is a philosopher, is the position here.
I love that. She does says that to Travis Kelce, we presume that you know Ball and I know Aristotle.
So just to wrap up, Ryan, what do you think Taylor would say if she were asked where we came from, why we're here, and where we're going?
There's always two things that Taylor thinks about the future. And one of them we could call bejeweled Taylor Swift. And that's the one who says, like, ask me why I'm still here, where it's sort of like, she's still here because she's the best. She's the best at what she does. And where she'll be in the future is still here because she keeps doing it. And the other Taylor is the one who, from the very first album, who wrote Mary's Song. And he imagines, you know, when you'll be 87, I'll be 89, and you'll still look at me like the stars that shine. And that's the kind of the setting of imagining that the meaning is not the bejeweledness, but the relationshipness. And the tension in those two things of imagining the future, I feel like, is a motivational thing to reconcile in Swiftian self-reflection.
Swiftian self-reflection.
Self-reflection.
My favorite phrase of the night.
I'm sorry.
I loved it. Oh, no, that is a beautiful nugget.
Do you think she'll be satisfied if, rather than getting somebody, you know, when 87, 89 or whatever, if it just keeps being this like relationship after relationship till the end of her days? Do you think she will view that as, you know, lovely, write more albums, more songs, or do you think she's going to be disappointed?
That's a great question. As I said, I can't help but hope that, and I think this is true, is that whatever turns her life takes, she'll definitely write about it. She'll definitely narrate it. And I think that it will be meaningful and good for her, whichever thing it is.
I've assumed the same, Ryan. I sense in her something that feels a little bit like insatiable and will, like, literally not capable of stopping or getting out of the public eye. And so there are moments where I worry for her as a person, but as a consumer, I feel almost like grateful that I might have this like constant person right at my age or phase of life who's singing about what it's like to crest into your 40s and then your 50s and what it's like to accomplish many things and fail at many things. Like, we will hear her continue to process that unless she learns to stop. And maybe both sides, both trajectories could be happy.
I love that. I felt great about that characterization as you were saying it.
Really?
Yeah. I was edified by that.
And yeah, can this method of redeeming it all through music, is that just the answer? You just keep doing that? Yeah. Maybe.
Well, and we hear that metaphor of it's music for her, but it's whatever we're creating for us, right? Like, we're redeeming it with the experiences that we have, that we're taking this and we're churning it into the beauty that we put back out into the world and the things that we create together. And so if she's just like the most exaggerated version of that, then I'll use her as a symbol and try to stay motivated.
Yeah, totally. And it is really beautiful what she's offering, right? That vulnerability of you just keep going and figuring out how to redeem it. I actually think that's all you can do.
Yeah.
Oh, what a fun discussion.
All right.
Ryan, thank you so much.
Thank you. There is really no kinder thing that a person could do for me than to just sit around and talk about Taylor Swift lyrics. And so I really appreciate your extending me that gift.
Boy, do I have some friends that you need to get lunch with.
Thank you everyone for listening. If you want to continue the conversation with us, we've got a couple of options for you. You're welcome to email us with any feedback or topic suggestions at hello@thesoloists.org. You can also follow us on Instagram. Our account handle is the.soloists. And if you're not on Instagram, don't let us give you FOMO. Enjoy being unplugged from social media. Thanks everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.